Hmm. Well, guys, hello again, and welcome back. There's been someone who's been wanting me to do another one of these. We haven't really had any topics in the comments, but since the last time we did was characters, right? I thought maybe we could do games. What makes a good game, right? Now, what makes a good game? I think there are different categories that can make a game good, like gameplay and mechanics, right? Even if a game doesn't have great story, if you're playing it for the mechanics and the fighting, then it can be a good game. But if we're talking about like the epitome of a good game, I'd say it has to have story, a good story, a good theme, a good atmosphere, and then good mechanics. Now, when I say mechanics, I'm not going to be like, oh, it has to be like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, no. But mechanics that fit into what the creator or developer is trying to make it, Like if I'm playing like a deck builder, I'm not going to expect it to be like super duper fancy, and even if it does look super fancy, it may not be great. Because graphics are, frankly, I don't think they're that important. Like, you need graphics that are good. Now, good doesn't mean realistic. It means to have a certain style to it that fits the narrative you're trying to create. And then as well, depending on the type of game you're making, right? Because like some games, like your single player or whatever, you don't really need to delve into character development to that much, Let's say you're doing one like, kind of like an MMO or even just an RPG, right? Personally, I'm more of a fan of RPGs like Nier Automata and Nier Replicant, right? Those ones pretty darn fun to do. Getting sucked into another world. And I think one thing that made it pretty good is that firstly the atmosphere, right? You have the songs that just really fit into the game. It really does. But also, the characters are fleshed out, Well, some are definitely more fleshed out than others, but the main thing is that they have their own personality. They aren't just like a random non-player character that's, just kind of there to give quests. Like, they have a bit of dialogue that gives a bit of their personality, even if it isn't great or grand, right? But yeah, I'd say mechanics are definitely more dependent, Because what might be a great game to someone, maybe off to someone else. Like, if you've ever played Rain World before, when that game, really fun, I tell ya, but at the beginning, you're all for controlling the player character, right? And if some people want the game to be intuitive to make it a good game, well then that would be a pretty bad game on people's opinion, right? So we're trying to think of what's the most appealing for the majority of people, right? And I mean, for the majority of people, it'd probably be a game that it might not be a super in-depth story, but endearing enough to that gets the people who are invested in the story and invested in the game. So like the story can be on the kind of like side quest or whatever, like random notes as well. And then the people who are playing for mechanics can mainly play for mechanics, And then the atmosphere, I do think often dystopian goes pretty well nowadays. I mean, you have like Cyberpunk, you have Metro Exodus, you have, or you just have Metro in general, right? Rain World for me, another kind of like apocalyptic. It does seem to be a pretty decent theme to go for. Like, yeah, even Nier Automata, right? Humans being wiped out. Now, does that necessarily make a game good? No. I'd say I'd say there's like 3 things that make a game good, you know. And you need 2 of them to be a good game. All 3 to be a great game. So of course the first one would be mechanics. Good mechanics are paramount to, well, a game being good for a majority of people, right? And then story. And then the last, I feel like it's theme or aesthetic, you know. Theme and aesthetic. Because I think that puts into the graphics, right? They don't need to be realistic, but they need to kind of fit in. Kind of feel, kind of a feeling to it that makes it feel immersive, right? Like you go to Hollow Knight, right? 2D, it ain't really known for realistic. But the game's well loved, and I mean, the character designs, the backgrounds, right? Even the music, right? The themes of the music in the background gives a good vibe to it. I would say makes it an A-tier game. Now, I would love to think of some like D-tier games so I could use them as examples for what's bad and what's good. But even then, like, I still think even a bad game can be, or what would be a bad game can be elevated through story. Like, I'm not gonna lie, Limbus, or let's do Library of Ruina, right? Gameplay-wise, pretty simple, right? If you like card building or deck building, pretty good, pretty, you know, let's say it's designed for you. But the thing that mainly had me you know, involved in it and liked it and, you know, played all through was because I was, you know, engrossed in the story. I wanted to see what happened next, you know. Wanted to see more of the characters, stuff like that. And I think, like, you know, if a game is lacking mechanics, like if the mechanics are just okay, they need to have a good theme, aesthetic, theme slash aesthetic, and as I said, story. Because gameplay and mechanics are basically the same, but you can only get like you can only get really so good when you get to mechanics, right? For like certain games, so like you're playing a deck builder, it can only be so much of a deck builder and you can't really go further. Though I think one thing that can make a game good is whether it has, well, a kind of a spin. Something that makes it unique. Because a game that's, you know, even a bit better than average on most scales, like say gameplay, story, right? Gameplay, story, theme, right? If it doesn't have a bit of a twist, right? A game can still be good, right? But a twist can kind of elevate it. And when I say a twist, I don't necessarily mean a twist, like an actual, like, plot twist or something, but more so something that makes it unique. Now, spoilers here, spoilers here. Gonna be spoiling a bit of Nier Automata, Nier Replicant, right? Yeah. So like, for instance, or you know, even, well, a bit of Rain World as well. So Nier Automata, right? The shtick of, no, just even be able to collect your own body and other people's bodies, how other people around can help you. Now I know that's kind of for both Niers, really. I know for both Niers, but it's kind of know what we're talking about, okay? Actually, I'm not sure you can collect body parts on the other Nier Replicant, but never mind that. It's more so the end part, right? What makes it really memorable is at the end, as well as playing, you know, each character. You can play them all differently, right? They all have their own story. Great as well, but the end part where you can sacrifice your data, that is really what made it well known, you know? Well known. Nier Automata, the multiple chapters and multiple redos you can do to get the true ending, you know? I don't know if it was the first to do it, but at least for me, it had that kind of allure that made me want to keep playing, want me to keep going, get more indebted or more invested in the story, and see where it led, you know. Rain World, you have that reincarnation, right? And kind of learning as you go. You don't really hold your hand, you just kind of have to go. Figure out where to go. I remember when I first played Rain World, I accidentally made it to the end level, or the end part. Yeah, Nightmare. Nightmare. That's why, honestly, I think Persona, on that note, I think, ooh, let's talk about Bioshock, right? Even with its outdated graphics, right? It feels like a masterpiece, at least in my opinion. Bioshock 2, Bioshock Infinite, weakest of the bunch, not gonna lie. It kind of threw away every aesthetic, just kind of threw away every vibe that it was going for kind of like a happy, weird one. Well, like, think about it like this, okay? Bioshock, you do see the characters, right? You see the characters, especially in, like, let's say, yeah, I guess Bioshock 2, right? Who you're saving, who you're killing, right? You kind of get glimpses of their personality, what they act like, how they do. Now, sorry, this, kind of vague in my mind, you know. I don't know how it was before, but it kind of felt like it separated itself apart from other games. At least in my opinion, it kind of had its own kind of story, its own theme that made it stand out. Playing this like big hulking Big Daddy. Or I guess even in the original, right? These plasmids and stuff like that going to this underground world, or underwater world, I should say, underwater world. It just kind of gave its own vibe, one that was unique to it, right? Well, compared to like, let's say Dark Souls. Wrong one. Dark Souls is, nope. It just, I don't know, at least to me, it never feels that unique. Well, it may be good, right? Elden Ring is kinda, I'd say, at least according to people, right? From what I've seen, Elden Ring is better. It just has a more immersive world. It kinda has its own twist with all the charms and deities and stuff like that, right? I said I've never played it or never watched it, I can only go off by what I heard and what I vaguely remember, right? But if we're talking about, like, what's another game? I guess even Persona series, right? They're all like going into a world, the perfect soundtrack, the fight that, you know, it only goes really as far as it can. Now, of course you go Persona 5 Strikers, which is different. Didn't really have the amount of story I would like though. But, no, I'd say what makes Persona 5 at least a good game, or Persona 5 Royale. It's not anything unique. Or I guess technically unique, right? Persona is right from Persona, but that's the same as Persona 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? Or the Shin Megami Tensei or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of the same with like Persona 4 or 5. Honestly, I think Persona 5 Royale is a lot better than Persona 4. It's why I haven't been playing it as much. I kind of slowed down on Persona 4 because I've been enjoying Valorant a lot more. Just, the characters don't feel as real. Well, real isn't the right word. They don't feel as realistic, you know. Someone you can actually imagine as a real person, you know. Well, if you're talking about like a game that elevates, I guess we should do an example for a game that, with a twist or whatever, or its own kind of unique aspect to it, elevates it right to something that it's at least better than what it would be, right? Doki Doki Literature Club, right? Like, I remember being super young. It's like, oh, it's a free virtual novel. I'm gonna play it, right? Oh man, I'm playing it, everything's fine, and I'm like, huh. This is nice, and it just went downhill, downhill, downhill. I went the Yuri route. And I was like, holy heck. You know, we just hear her just going crazier and crazier. It's like, huh. Definitely made it more memorable. And then you're talking about memorable, right? Like Undertale. Like that determination. Fans, right? Even going, hanging out with the characters, right? It kind of elevated it. And made it unique. Plus the gameplay itself felt unique enough, at least compared to what I played, right? Just a uniqueness to it makes it kind of more stand out, yay. But I guess it's kind of, it's back on topic. It's kind of hard to define what makes a game good. Especially since what's good to one person might be awful to another, right? Like someone might really like Stardew Valley for the characters, a bit of fighting, stuff like that, right? While others are gonna hate it for being so slow and just not their type, right? Some people like different genres. Some people like puzzle, some people like, you know, kind of relaxing, some people like whatever the heck Dark Souls is, Dark Souls-esque ones, roguelike, whole bunch of genres, right? And then if you try hitting everyone, you're not gonna appease anyone, right? So I guess in the end, really, there is no thing that makes a game the best out of the best. Now, there are ones that will appeal to the majority of people, right? But some people are gonna hate it because it doesn't appeal to them. And that's why, you know, I feel like mechanics can only get you so far, right? I feel like story and theme is gonna get a lot of people in. Now, some people don't care for story or theme and only care for mechanics, but I'd like to say most people care for story and theme, the kind of vibe it gives. Now, that's to say if the mechanics is utterly awful, people aren't gonna want to play it. But if the mechanics is just okay, but the theme and story are, and the aesthetic are great, I think people would be willing to play it, you know, as long as the gameplay is okay, right? Like heck, I like... Sorry about that. Random bird clock that we have. Oh yeah, I know. I mean, hey, eventually you might actually be able to tell what time it is based off of that. If you hear enough of them. Like that one's one. Just to let you know. Yeah, I got hidden in my room and then... Well, it's kind of stayed there after I found it. Because it's mine now. They did it to annoy me and now it's mine. Bright side only turns on with light. Oh, sorry, we're getting sidetracked. But yeah, as I was saying, Ace Attorney, right? Definitely not some people's game. A lot of reading, barely any mechanics, right? I think some mechanics need to be, at least a base level of mechanics needs to be there for a lot of people to enjoy the game, right? Like Little Big Planet, right? Not too hard. Didn't really have a story, but had a good vibe, right? That's why I think, like, depending on the type of gamer, there's you need to hit at least 2 of 3 aspects, right? You have the theme / aesthetic, that's going to include the music and the vibe and stuff like that, right? And then you have the mechanics, and then you have the story. Now, if you want a more, like, story-related audience, or the more, like, people who play for kind of the feeling it gives, then you're going to want story and vibe or feeling or theme, right? And then mechanics, you just kind of need to have at least a bit of it. Even if it's just kind of like choosing, like, choosing dialogue options or searching around, like Ace Attorney, right? At least that's how I mainly feel about it. But man, you know, it's so much harder for me to determine what's good and what's bad. And since we only do one take, you know, it ain't like we're planning it. We're just kind of talking along as we go, doing this ramble. But hey, I think we did enough, eh? We're getting around to the 20-minute mark. So guys, if you want this to continue, and you want it to be more frequent than it is now, suggest topics, and I mean good topics. Please don't suggest tech and politics or stuff like that. Because man, someone said, like, do politics, and I'm like, that's gonna be that can death me if I do politics. Well, not the death of me, but more like something you don't... See, politics you're never gonna appease everyone. Even, this you ain't gonna appease everyone, but it's gonna have a lot less backlash than if you do politics, eh? Well, anyways, hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment on what you would like to discuss next, and peace out. Have a good one. Goodbye. Goodbye, and goodbye.